Yeah, I think we can start. Yeah. I know that it's been huge conversation and we have, huge plenary discussing on the Article 80, but yeah, I think it's really good opportunity to have this session now. Firstly, I would like to introduce myself. My name is Cindy Julianti. I am from Working Group ICC Indonesia, and also acting as the representation of the ICC Consortium Southeast Asia. So thank you so much, UN Women Caucus, who giving me a chance to moderating the session. It's been so glad and honored for me to have these opportunities. So yeah, I think here we have a really wonderful source person who will discussing a very important issues on digital sequence information, something that is really, heard and look like scientific, but actually this is a very cross-cutting interdisciplinary approach, and it's really interrelated for the social issues. So then here we have 4 source person that will share their thoughts, perspective, and also lesson for all of us. First, we have Miss Lim Lee Sing from Third World Network here in the left side. Good evening, Miss Lim.
Hello.
Thank you for attending. And the second, we have also Cecilia Gitaiga, lawyer from the High Court of Kenya. Welcome, Ms. Cecilia. The third, we have Ms. Yesenia Hernandez from Rueda de Mediana AC. So thank you so much, Ms. Yesenia, for coming to the seminar. And the last, we have a male source person in the women conversation. Okay. So we have Mr. Jesse Rasolo Jonah from Natural Justice. Hello. Thank you for attending the hearing. So without any further ado, because we also have a really limited time to discuss, as this is side event really, quite limited for all of us, but I hope we can have a really fruitful and also rich conversation. The first, I might throw the first question to Ms. Lim Teen from the Third World. So as we know that the conversation of the DSI is very huge, yeah, and it was as I said, very interdisciplinary. Actually, it's not only limited to scientific approach, where the scientists may be coming from the ideas of technologies, something that is really biological aspect, but there's also social aspect that we also need to ensure, especially in how we connect with, the discourse of recognition, contribution, so on and so forth. So what exactly this DSI conversation is all mean about, and how this conversation will impact women, especially on the contribution, recognition, and benefit sharing.
Okay. Thank you very much, can you hear me? And good evening to our guests and also our friends online. So it's nice. A bit unfortunate about the timing of the contact group session and the plenary going on, but it's okay, because I think these are important conversations that we need to have. And that haven't really come up yet so far, or not very much in the DSI discussions. So my task here, just as the first speaker, is really to try and provide a broad picture context, because I think many of us, and me included, when we talk about DSI, it's kind of like, oh my gosh, it's so technical. Yeah. But actually, at the crux of the issue is really about fairness and justice, right? That is the basic thing. So I'm going to just kind of explain a little bit about Decision 15/9, just very briefly what it says, and just take you through what the crux of the debate is, and why this discussion is so important, and then try to pick up a few points, which my colleagues, of course, will pick up on in more detail as they speak, about what the implications are for women and girls. All right. So now, last year in Montreal, parties to the CBD, this decision called Decision 15/9, they basically explicitly agreed that the benefits from the use of DSI on genetic resources should be shared fairly and equitably. And it established, as part of the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework, a multilateral mechanism for benefit sharing from the use of DSI on genetic resources, including a global fund. And there's clear recognition that any of the benefits, whether they're monetary or non-monetary, should primarily be used to support conservation and sustainable use of biodiversity and benefit indigenous peoples and local communities. So let me just roll back a bit and explain what the crux of the debate around DSI is. Basically, because there's been such advances in biotechnology and synthetic biology, these days it's very easy to sequence the genomes of organisms. All of us have a genome, right? And this contains our genetic information. You may have heard the terms DNA, RNA, and then of course it goes further, but let's suffice to say that the technology has advanced. So all this sequencing of the information, you may have heard of, like, for example, that the human genome has been sequenced, or the sequence of wheat, the genome of wheat has been sequenced. So much of this sequence information, and there's lots of it, is being placed in these databases. Databases which are called open access databases. These are public databases. Alternatively, if companies are the ones that sequence it, oftentimes they hoard the data in private data banks. Now, what this means actually, when we say open access databases, it means that the genomic data that is put there, this is the information. For example, if it is a sequence of a virus, that information is posted in this thing we call the internet, right? And then it can be accessed. This is the status quo. Access without restrictions or obligations. And it can also be patented in some jurisdictions. And this is essentially a free-for-all for corporations. And the more that this data is made available without access and benefit sharing conditions, this is actually raw materials that corporations and other actors can generate benefit from. I'll give you a very concrete example. All COVID-19 vaccines, most of us, I think all of us are now vaccinated. All COVID-19 vaccines are based on digital sequence information. And we know that Pfizer, for example, made $37 billion in sales from its vaccines in 2021, more so in 2022. But we know at the same time, the benefits, of course, we all benefited, but this was not equitably shared, right? Because remember, at the start of the pandemic, many developing countries, frontliners, were not able to access the vaccines because there was no specific benefit sharing agreement at that time with these. But that's just one example. Many other examples occur in agriculture, for example. So, but when we think of DSI, it actually originates from biodiversity and genetic resources, right? And the peoples who have steward biodiversity and genetic resources are indigenous peoples, small farmers, women, and of course, largely in developing countries where most of the world's biodiversity is held. So in this system that is currently in place, women and girls are likely to be disproportionately affected. Why do I say this? One is we know that they play a major role in the guardianship of genetic resources and the associated traditional knowledge. And biopiracy of these resources and knowledge can occur and is occurring. Two is they are unlikely to receive benefits from DSI use if there are no clear rules governing the access and benefit sharing of DSI, much less if they are not gender responsive. We know time and time again, if these rules are gender blind, women and girls will not benefit. Okay, so most ABS laws now do not explicitly include DSI. And this means that the fair and equitable benefit sharing objective, remember this is the third objective of the CBD and the Nagoya Protocol as well, it actually may be circumvented. And this is precisely why the discussions at the CBD were kicked off in 2016. So really, it's very simple. If we want to be fair and just, we need to ensure, also in the case of DSI, that digital biopiracy doesn't occur. And secondly, there is fair and equitable benefit sharing for the utilization of genetic resources, DSI, and associated traditional knowledge back to the countries and the people who provided these resources. Okay. So when you have these publicly accessible database, of course, it's important to allow access for scientific research. But in our view, this should not mean free and unrestricted access for commercialization of benefits. We think it's important to have data access rules or standard terms and conditions to ensure that access doesn't perpetuate digital piracy and to put in place fair and equitable benefit sharing obligations on such databases. Now, it's very important to note that these kinds of databases that I'm talking about are very different to community databases. And this distinction actually needs to be explained to women, especially Indigenous women, because we know that community databases are set up, but the rules that operate around these are very different. The power relations that operate are also very different, right? Now here at the CBD and in this week in Geneva, we're discussing putting in place a multilateral mechanism. What this means is that if you think about physical resources and access to benefit sharing rules, this is largely a bilateral transaction. Someone accesses a physical genetic resource, and they have to share benefits back with the country or, according to the national laws, the communities who provided those resources. But because with DSI, and there's so much of it and already existing in databases, we are discussing a multilateral mechanism whereby you put it into a global pool, and then therefore the benefits also come out of that, right? And we agreed that the approach is going to be largely multilateral and that it could include a global fund as well, right? Now, what we're concerned is whether this mechanism is going to be fit for purpose. Will we have a strong or weak mechanism? Because if we have a weak mechanism and all DSI is put into the system, it may actually threaten sovereignty of parties to ensure that access is appropriate. And appropriate access is the standard that's set up in the CBD and Nagoya Protocol. And when we think about women's role, appropriate access must also put in place safeguards to ensure that women, as the providers of these resources, DSI, and associated traditional knowledge, are not coerced to give up their genetic materials for sequencing, that the materials are sequenced based on free, prior, and informed consent. And they should be explicitly informed about the potential of sequencing when they share a genetic resource with the user, and also understand the consequences of what happens when DSI from their genetic resources are uploaded into public databases. Because the users of that DSI will not directly engage with them anymore to provide benefits, but they'll be sharing benefits mostly through the multilateral mechanism. So it's important that women have a right to know about the use of the DSI, about the outcomes, as well as should be able to access legal aid to address any violation of their rights over genetic resources, DSIs, and associated traditional knowledge. Now we come to the benefit sharing part, and I know my other fellow speakers will be talking a lot more in detail about it, but I just wanted to make a few points before I end. Firstly, that we have to design benefit sharing with gender equality in mind, because gender-blind benefit sharing means that women and girls will lose out, despite the important role they play as stewards of genetic resources, such as seeds, medicinal plants, and the amount of immense associated traditional knowledge they hold. And of course, you hear a lot of talk here about the Global Fund, because that's included in the multilateral mechanism. And the Global Fund is, of course, about where monetary benefits from the use of DSI are paid into. Now, given the clear correlation between biodiversity and Indigenous peoples' territories, monetary benefits, and it's been agreed, should largely go directly to support Indigenous peoples and local communities. And of course, then we have to ensure that women are very visible in this as well, right? Because we know that women's roles in conserving and sustainably using biodiversity are very evident. Now, I just wanted to draw sorry, do I need to
2 minutes.
Okay, yeah, I'm coming to the end. To draw something related to Target 23 of the KMGBF, because we have some guidance there. And in particular, Target 23 talks about recognizing women's equal rights and access to land and natural resources. And these rights are fundamental to their stewardship of biodiversity and genetic resources from which DSI originate. So we also have to be creative in thinking about how do we ensure that benefits support women's equal access and rights to land and natural resources. Suffice to say, and I think others will be talking about non-monetary benefits, because we know that women suffer from lack of visibility in many sectors, particularly in science and technology. There are systemic barriers to their participation, whether it's, and this includes biological explorations, because there is a link between the physical resource and the DSI. And any capacity building and technology transfer has to prioritize women. And this is, again, specifically recognized in Decision 59, when it says that we need to support capacity needs and priorities, and emphasizes the capacity needs and priorities of women. So there's a hook there, right, for ensuring gender participation. Finally, participation of women in the governance of the fund is essential. Yesterday, we discussed a lot about governance of the fund. Who do we include? Who do we exclude? Are there conflicts of interest with the private sector? But I wanted to just end by saying that we need to think about participation with a full understanding of the term. It has to include access to information, participation in decision-making, and access to justice. So I'll stop there. Sorry for taking too long. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Ms. Lim. It was like a very comprehensive explanation about what exactly happened also in the CBD, yeah. And we have Decision 59. But what I can recap is that I think when we talk about women, is that we all agree that women is the guardians of the genetic resource. So it should be visible, the women's participation and role in the conversation of the DSIs. So the next source person, I will throw a question to Cecilia. We know that there has been a grouping issues, yeah, in the DSI conversation in the CBD, at least 16 issues, and it covering about discussion about contribution of fund, disbursements of fund, non-monetary benefits sharing, governance, and other related approach. So the question is that what exactly your opinion about this? And in this context, how these issues and this coverage, points of the Decision 59 can ensure equitable and fair benefit sharing of the use of the genetic resource for women.
Thank you very much. So, thank you very much for that question. On my part, and also thank you very much for the online participants and the participants who have joined us here today, and for the people who have organized this meeting. On my part, I would say that the beginning part for our conversation is where we started. It was the Nagoya Protocol, which is the third objective of the convention, which seeks to implement the third objective of the convention. And that was very clear even in the discussions towards the conversation on DSI. And here you will find that in the GBF, there's also now the relation with the Nagoya Protocol. It's not an isolated discussion. And that being the case, it also means that implementation of the framework that we are discussing now, there should be a conversation about how we achieve the objectives of the Nagoya Protocol. And like Ling said, access should be fair and equitable. And even in that access being fair and equitable, I think the conversation that we are missing here at this meeting is perhaps the issue of how we achieve this access and fair sharing of benefits for women. To begin with, when we saw the text in the first time, it was conspicuously loud that it was not speaking to women directly in the beginning. So with a bit of conversation over the last couple of days, at least we can see that as of today, there's a non-paper saying that we will appear in, we shall participate in the governing body, which is great, of the fund and the mechanism, which is great. And the only other mention of women which I have seen is in the capacity building, that would be beneficiaries of capacity building. Now, my interaction with what is fair and equitable benefit sharing makes me ask, so how do we ensure that there is proper sharing of benefits? No, first of all, access that is fair, free, prior, informed consent, how it should be done with women at the table, because according to Target 23, we are supposed to be included, inclusive, participatory, all those words that are used in the GBF are supposed to be reflected in the outcome of discussions on DSI. So to begin with, it's the participation of women in decisions that are being made. And this is missing from the beginning, because if we only find ourselves explicitly mentioned in capacity building and the funding mechanism, then the question that begs is, how will the policies and the laws that are anticipated in the GBF be designed? And these laws and policies for implementation of the GBF, and in line with the CBD and the Nagoya Protocol, are also supposed to take into account the gender plan of action. And the gender plan of action and the GBF have specific milestones up to 2030 for the gender plan of action, and up to 2030, at least for the GBF, there's a vision up to 2030, while seeking to achieve the vision up to 2050 of living in harmony with nature. So we have measurable targets that we need to take into account. And up to now, the non-paper that has been published does not mention anything about the gender plan of action, yet we brought it up. So the framework is not complete. We still need to have more conversation about how we ensure that frameworks such as the SDGs, which are also key, and I've seen that in the non-paper, if I recall correctly, are also incorporated, because there's also a gender target there to achieve gender equality. And the issue about the SDGs is that they are related to one another, so they'll also help us achieve many other targets. So in terms of scale, I think the inclusion of these other frameworks is very important. Now, looking at the principles in Decision 15.9, we may not have been explicitly mentioned, but I see that it also seeks to ensure that there's recognition that monetary and non-monetary benefits arising from use of DSI on genetic resources should, in particular, be used to support the sustainable use of biological diversity and inter alia benefit indigenous peoples and local communities. So for me, that word inter alia also means at least there is some scope for inclusion of women in these principles, even without explicit mention. I think that is something that is worth pursuing. But for me, I think also it would be good to make sure that we have gender disaggregated data, so that if it is the issue of funding, we can be able to tell how much money has gone to women out of the whole, and how much money of that money has been used for capacity building for women, such things, so that we can also be able to tell when the benefits are realized, or when finally we have to report on the outcomes, that the women have benefited equally as the men in the society. And here I think we also were sensitive to mention that we want other considerations beyond the scientific benefit sharing, as we understand it, to be taken into account, the socioeconomic considerations, because the Nagoya Protocol is pretty expansive on what is monetary and non-monetary benefits. And these are some of the things that maybe might appear in the bilateral agreements, but at the same time, because it is implied that the DSI conversation should be had with all the other frameworks in mind, then it is not possible to leave behind the prescriptions of the Nagoya Protocol, which also include, for example, the priorities in the local communities. And then if you look at, on the target of the GBFH on how to progress until 2030, it's expected that the GBF will have these goals, the 23 goals, which need to be initiated like immediately by the time of the last COP and completed by 2030, at least in the first phase. So we do not have much time. And I think this is something that we need to pay attention to. And the incorporation of all these goals and targets and how to implement is something that needs to happen in this meeting. Because if we, for example, postpone or even delay up to the next COP, we will have missed out on what are the expectations of the GBF. And for me, I think my parting shot is that the gender plan of action should be among the frameworks that are incorporated in the conversation on DSI, and the frameworks that should be maintained and observed in implementation of DSI.
Thank you, Ms. Cecilia. So, so what I can capture is that we still have huge homework, tons of homework, to mainstreaming this gender issues on the DSI, for example. And also you mentioned about how, again, the women is very invisible in this conversation. We can see it from the non-existent of the gender action plan and other, critical issues for women itself. So I will next also asking the same context to Ms. Yesenia, but here maybe in the context of the non-monetary benefit sharing that we also discussed, that somehow the conversation of women here is only on capacity building, for example. So is that all enough to tackle the challenge on the discourse and the mainstreaming of gender issues in this DSI?
Thank you very much for having me here. Sorry. Okay, I thank you for the question. I would like to start my participation with pointing out two important things. First, as we mentioned before, the women and girls, we contribute to nature conservation, but also to diversification of seeds, for example, in a traditional way, in our communities, in our context, local context. But now we have current challenges, such as environmental defenders or with the new technologies. We have a lot of scientists, women scientists. And the second one is the point that we shared yesterday. The access and benefit sharing is obviously it's an opportunity to funding biodiversity conservation, but also to address some socioeconomical disparities between countries or inside the countries, and the gender in gender disparities. Well, as I am a biologist, I'd like to compare the DSI ecosystem. We have different actors. We have the women as a knowledge holders at the local level, as I mentioned, and scientists. And we have women as practitioners, of course, with genetic resources management and improvement. We have decision makers, women decision makers, business sector, and NGOs. Women are across all those sectors in this DSI ecosystem. And the Nagoya Protocol is very clear, as my sister mentioned, in the role of the women in the access and benefit sharing. And the women don't have sometimes access to land, territories, and resources. And and I would like to invite all of you to think about what are the consequences of the invisibility of women in DSI and in ABS discussions. Okay, of course, we have now approved our gender plan of action, and we have the Nagoya Protocol text, and we have the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework with a very strong mandates and actions that need to be carried on in regard to the women and gender responsive inclusion. We have the decision in 15.9. And with regard to non-monetary benefits, as if all of us have been, can check in the Nagoya Protocol text, the non-monetary benefits are a very long list. Than monetary benefits, obviously, is just one. And but some questions that as a woman I have are what is fair and equitable in a women perspective. When sometimes we need to think about, not sometimes, we need to think about the when DSI implies traditional knowledge or access to the sample from indigenous territories. We have been talking about the traditional knowledge, but what about the bioprospecting in indigenous territories and taking the samples? The duty of the research or the person who is going to the communities is to research or to be more specific in to know who is the knowledge holder. Yeah? If it's a woman or a group of women, etc. Women elders. We are also forgetting to the elders. The elders are critical with the COVID situation. We lost a lot of elders with very critical traditional knowledge for crucial for biodiversity conservation, and in the design of the benefit sharing processes to share specific benefits with them and support obviously women initiative, etc. But I have some points as a policy option recommendation with regard to the non-monetary benefits. Access the relationship of start with the relationship between women and DSI to a specific first when we are designing some benefit sharing process or program, we need to think about the specific needs of women. And very one critical point is women from the IPLCs, IPLCs women, because we still facing disparities and challenging conditions to ensure the full and effective participation along all the implementation of DSI policies in the frame of the ABS, the Access and Benefit Sharing and the Nagoya Protocol. We have at least the double or more roles, and sometimes when we put all the activities for nature conservation and women, we are increasing the work and the no work that is not recognized or is not paid. And we have a lack of rights over lands and resources and on the decision making at a very local level. And we don't have access or a lot of women to the knowledge and technologies. Sometimes in some countries and some groups, women cannot go to the university or have higher studies. And the economic violence, we need to think very specific about this because the economic violence is still happening. And when we have benefit sharing with economic, and this is why the non-monetary benefits could be a specific policy and very good policy for women, if we address those kind of benefits. Sorry for repeating the word. And a better community-based decision making. We can work, this is a work for academia and NGOs to work with the communities to include the specific needs of women and youth and elders and other groups, and how to include the gender responsiveness in the community protocols. For instance, I work with the community protocols and we include the specific needs of women, and when we will have when the community will have a access and benefit sharing initiative, one of the most important groups, or the first groups that needs to receive the benefits are women, youth, and elders, and include the women along all the process of free prior informed consent or prior and informed consent and the mutual agreed terms negotiation. The next is receive we need the review of the national legal frameworks, but also the academia and business sector need to review their compliance, their commitments, their due diligence policies to include more strongly the gender responsiveness, specifically with DSI and ABS initiatives. And we can involve with other bodies on agreements on international institution or at international levels, at the national levels to coordinate, because they have a lot of knowledge on gender responsiveness or lessons learned, and we can take advantage of this knowledge, because one of the constraints for all of us is time. gender responsiveness in the implementation of national bodies and gender balance in gender policies. Yesterday we asked for a specific mention of gender or women, not as a part of the civil society, but when a specific mentioned as rate holders, and now reading the document, we are not mentioned as we asked. We need a specific resources for capacity building and advocate, because we need to. Okay, yes, I will. And evaluation of what is fair and equitable, I mentioned before, and do diligence of academics. We need a academia with more stronger ethical and moral rules, and obviously in the data governance in fair and fair principles, we need the gender responsiveness and and the policies to give rights over lands, territories, and resources. And finally, I would like to end with recognition of the DSI could be a good way to empower for the women economic empowerment, and to share with you my final message that states women don't want to be passive, we want to be an active actor on DSI. However, we need specific conditions to contribute to science, technology, nature conservation, both in the traditional and the modern way. Thank you, Sister.
Thank you, Nia. Thank you so much for the presentation, Ms. Yesenia. So I would not recap because it's been huge, but what I can say is that women is on all sectors. So we cannot only talking about indigenous, for example, but we are all in all sectors, right? So here, the last of our source person, I would just throw a questions about the lesson learned. Yeah, we know that one of the emphasis point in the DSI conversations is about the role of indigenous peoples and interest of the indigenous local communities, particularly for the women. So what strategies and best practice can be adopted to promote women's leadership in the DSI research and utilization? Thank you.
So thank you for inviting me to be part of this panel.
Yeah.
Yeah, so built on what have been said, but from a practical point of view.
Yeah.
I think it is important to emphasize once again that the gender justice matter in the context of APS and DSI is not limited to the APS.
Yeah.
But as you say, there are other actors out there as well, the researchers, the decision makers, and others. And if we talk about gender justice, that somehow means that there is an injustice observed out there. So then I think that from a practical reason, it's important to identify and see the gender justice throughout the DSI value chain and know what are the specific needs at the several level of those value chains, especially in terms of women participation and capacities. So, for example, at local level, and I think that my colleagues talked about that, the approach of communities used to be the same, whether it's a genetic resources value chain or a DSI value chain. Providers of genetic resources that would be sequencing can be a woman, right?
Yeah.
And the traditional knowledge holders can be a woman as well. And women, as most of the time, the vectors of transmission of those knowledges. And yet, several or most of those the databases that we know on traditional knowledge do not really distinguish the woman and or the men traditional knowledge. So it doesn't really inform you exactly the importance of the gender dynamic. So as I say, that approaching communities around DSI, it's quite the same from the community perspective as the other utilization of the genetic resources. So the FPIC and MAT process can be the same for the communities. So through their local customary system, but also through their organization when it comes to decision-making and negotiation. But most of the time, it's just about the elements of benefit sharing that differ.
Yeah.
And I think that you said about the empowerment of the communities. But here then, in this situation, we are talking about women empowerment. Several customary laws exclude women and youth, in the decision-making system. Then I think that empowering women, especially before being involved into the DSI processes, is really key here. Through several tools, we know that community protocols and others, there are many others out there that could be used. Also, for example, at the level of research, because now we are more saying that the scientific research should be combined with the indigenous and traditional researchers. And there are out there a lot of indigenous people in local communities that are involved into the research system. And most of the time they could be part of the research team as well. So the observation is that the participation of women, for example, is rate in non-commercial value chain under DSI compared to the value chain on genetic resources, especially when it comes to the first stage of the DSI, the sequencing, the scanning, the uploading. And when you check, I just did that. I just checked the data online from the Observatoire des Métiers, and you can see that the data there inform that when it comes to the decision making, it's mostly the men that do that. But when it comes to the laboratory, side of the work, then it's mostly the men. So I think that this kind of dynamics, the level of dynamics, should be considered, particularly into the value chain. And same for the benefit sharing. The opportunity for the gender in DSI benefit sharing system can be at a different level. So we are now talking about multilateral system, but there is also the level of bilateral mutual agreements that are not excluded, especially for the DSI that are trust and regularized at the national level. Of course, that the value chain will continue, but there is this stage that we have not to, we should not forget. That here, making sure that the woman's participation at every stage of the decision making, the inclusivity, not only in terms of representation, but also in terms of capacity of contributing effectively into those decision making process, should be considered. And same for the multilateral system. I think that the Women Caucus is fighting to really see the woman and girl stated into the different texts. But look at the various practical, how to do that, especially because at the end, I think that it will be adopted. But it's important, I think, to capture and to collect the different best practices when it comes to implementing gender into this kind of area like DSI and access and benefit sharing, because then it will be just a text rather than something really very, very concrete. I'm going to stop there. I think that I have the time. Then we're happy to discuss something. Thank you.
Thank you. It's really enlightening. Thank you so much, Mr. Jesse. So, it's a very complex conversations actually, because mostly the example is that most of this research on DSI, for example, are coming to the indigenous communities, for example, and those are mostly still in a very high value of biodiversity. But then maybe the research process is not really able to include the rights holders, especially women, on that, and the researchers are just left behind without the rights holders of the knowledge are knowing what exactly the objective of this research and the benefit of creating this research, especially this specific DSI and genetic research resources. So for that, I think I will open the Q&A to our audience, and also online and offline. It's only maybe 2 or 3 questions from now. Yeah.
I would like to offer 2 warnings. Firstly, we are talking here as if everything was going on decently. But digital sequence information, we can always pretend something crossed the border virtually via internet, and at the same time smuggle cell cultures, but then pretend It's only crossed the border virtually. So it's a perfect hiding place for biodiversity, just old-fashioned biodiversity. And we have to be aware of that. Secondly, I have taken the trouble for many, many years to read the original publications about traditional knowledge. In most cases, it was women who were interviewed by Northern scientists. And they were so proud that somebody listened to them, that they gave everything away. And then this knowledge is used as a filter to find out useful qualities, either genetic sequences or the proteins that or other molecules that are made out of it. So we have to find a way. I mean, women are happy to share their knowledge. But in order for us to be able to share, we have to be very careful whom we tell the stories of our knowledge. Because WIPO, World Intellectual Property Organization, has not yet managed to securely protect traditional knowledge. That hasn't happened. So if you give it away, it will end up in a publication. It will be considered open source. It will be used by industry, and it's all male. And we need to defend our culture and our attitude, meaning that we need to make sure that whatever we give out stays either we don't give it out, hand it out, or it stays open source. There are publications that protect the common access and not the privatization, because I have also looked in the collections of private bioarchives who very carefully collect all the traditional knowledge publications, because they use them to filter useful sequences out of the incredible amount of DSI. And everyone always tells you there's an incredible amount of DSI. I'm a molecular biologist plus IT person. And they need the filters. And the filters are partially our traditional knowledge. So unless we protect our traditional knowledge from being privatized and ending up in private collections, being only used by the few large international chemical corporations, we are not doing the service we need to do to women. And so this is just 2 warnings. Firstly, there is still biopiracy. Secondly, do protect your traditional knowledge. Don't hand it out thoughtlessly to anyone who asks you.
Thank you. So I don't want to skip it to the next question, but maybe if you have any reaction for that, please, Miss. Okay, it's in you.
Thank you very much for your question and your concern. I agree. The past side event, I mentioned that women, our disparities as women make us more vulnerable to biopiracy. Biopiracy in the strict definition of the CDB, obviously is still a problem. And for the reason we need clear, first to capacity building and awareness with the communities and with the academia. One example that I would like to share is with the community protocols and the capacity building training before building our communities protocols in South Mexico. We encourage the people to be careful with the knowledge that they are sharing. And we have in the documents, they include some safeguards for the academia, because academia is the first part or the first actor that is promoting. Maybe they don't know the definition, or maybe they don't want to do something wrong. But when, as you mentioned, when the information is in one paper or some in the is public. Anybody can access and use those information. And I think if we can share something, but this any information or knowledge must be shared with the free priority for consent and with very clear rules from the communities and from the people that is a knowledge holder, and the clear benefit sharing. And then second one, I think as I saw the Nagoya protocol is in the community, in our experience with the community protocols, the local communities, the indigenous peoples wants to be users at the end, but they recognize that they need to have some alliances with some business sector or some good partners before doing that, because of obviously we don't have the money, the technology, and the transfer, etc. I think this could be very opportunity of justice. Thank you.
Okay, so thank you, Yesenia. Is there any question in online or?
I will share it by WhatsApp.
All right, so I think any other first person will.
Yeah.
All right, sure.
Oh.
See.
I could be back because the contact is
Yeah. All right.
so good. Well, yeah, because we will discuss this one paper and the contact group, one paper DSI, and as you said, it's I see women at two places, but that's not very common, and especially not in the case of benefit sharing. So I think there should be opportunity also in this discussion to lead to that to the wider issue of the gender plan, something like this. That would be as a good introduction. And we try to show that as a further discussion about parties for support.
Yeah.
Say that from discussions within the parties, that's not really beneficial to the agenda plan is discussed within the governments. Obviously, that needs to come from the concept.
Okay, so yeah, Cecilia, you might can react to that.
Thank you. First of all, I want to thank you. I want to applaud our gender champion from the back there. She has been in this conversation, and I agree. But piracy is still very it's taking place. But that the issue of women sharing knowledge, I think it's also not women alone. It includes even the male counterparts. And the tragedy is that some either they don't know, or for some they could be conduits for access to that knowledge. So it might be that we need very high ethical standards for operating. But I think even with the conversation on DSI, we are not moving away. We shouldn't move away. And I think I've seen this in the text somewhere where we're supposed to stick to the mechanisms that govern open data and access. But maybe it is not enough. Ethics needs to appear very prominently there. How this will be ensured using a mechanism which values all knowledge the same is something I still don't know, but I'm yet to see. I am a bit sad that all the knowledge on the open access database will be accessible the same way and valued the same way in terms of maybe the proposal, if funding is to come for the collective use of DSI. Because for me, I think there is some particular knowledge which might be of higher value than others. And I don't know whether it is something you would call okay or fair, because like the rooibos or honeybush in South Africa, I mean, that's a huge industry on its own. and that knowledge might not be equivalent to other types of knowledge without discrediting any. I'm just saying that there is knowledge that might not be of the same value as other types of knowledge. I don't know how that this can be achieved, and it also means that for us as women, in order to share benefits, it would be ideal if, for example, we are acknowledged that we are the owners of this knowledge, because in our age sets, in traditional societies, information is passed on when, for example, the girls mature to a certain age. So before that, the knowledge belongs to the women in the society. And this kind of knowledge is not community knowledge. And this is a presumption of DSI, that everything is owned by everyone the same way. That's really not the case. And I don't know how this framework is proposing to deal with that, but within the legal systems, and I think it's general, there's something about affirmative action that shouldn't be ignored. I may not hear the conversation here, but within national laws, there is in existence laws protecting women and affirmative actions for women and communities. So within policy and legal frameworks, it's possible to take advantage of existing frameworks to implement the GBF and the GPA together with the DSI fund and the mechanism in such a way that you load on other responsibilities into implementation. And this can be achieved through the NBSAP. I'm looking at the NBSAP as a great opportunity if it is done the right way, but we still need gender disaggregated data as far as possible. The other thing I wanted to mention is that the gender plan of action was supposed to support implementation of the GBF. So like Dr. Hartmut says, this is a conversation that we really must have and make sure it's one of the frameworks that is supporting implementation of the GBF. Besides that, I think, I think for now that is all. Thank you.
Yeah, I think, because we only have a couple minutes, and I think just go to the last question. It's going to be for Ms. Lim and also Jessie. So what will be the starting point for the next working group and then the COP itself? Maybe started from Jessie and Ms. Lim. So what will the best starting point for the next working group meeting and then the COP16?
I think that I already said it. It would be very interesting to have more information about the gender dynamics through the DSI, because we are talking about it. We're doing feedback from experiences. We do not have really objective data or information related to that. And yet it's important, I think, to reorient the action. But also it would be interesting to give guidance on the national biodiversity strategy and action plan that most of the country have already started to give guidance on how to consider this gender dynamics integration, not only for the DSI, but throughout the mechanism, actually. Because it's a human right-based approach, right? It's a human rights, and it should be considered as a human rights, because IQ target fails because of that, and we can afford to once again hold this. Just a good question. Thank you.
Ms. Lim.
Yeah, I think, thank you so much for the question. I think, as has been said, obviously, we have target 23 in the Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework. We have the gender plan of action. And right now we see a bit of a disconnect, right, in the DSI discussions that do not, where women are almost invisible in these discussions, or the role of women particularly. So I think I see it from two sides, right? On the access side, and we know that women are the holders of the resources, of the knowledge. That we know, right? And so if you apply the logic of justice and equity, the benefits have to be channeled back to women. But when we see the discussion on monetary and non-monetary benefits, there has to be, in my view, a very systematic plan on how do we do this, because we acknowledge women's roles in stewarding these resources and biodiversity and knowledge from which the DSI originates, right? So we don't see that systematic inclusion and how do I say this differentiation to ensure that women can benefit from the use of DSI. So I guess that's one starting point we could come to, because right now we have a non-paper, of course, that discusses these things in broad strokes, but it is gender blind.
Yeah.
So that has to change. Yeah.
The longer you discuss it, the more complicated it becomes.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, there are several spaces where we discuss DSI, and we are not sure that we have the same dynamic when it comes to the gender discussion into all those areas.
Yes.
So I think that the coordination with those spaces is also important, and having a kind of a report on maybe the same position when it comes to the gender perspective throughout those instruments, international instruments.
Yes.
So it's the working of how to integrating those conversations. Yeah. Okay. I would not recap or resume because there's a lot of things, but I will let this our source person today to provide their final statements. Yeah. Maybe from Jesse first and the rest.
So once again, thank you for to have invited me, the only male in the panel, but I think it's all about gender, right?
Dynamic.
But no, just to say that shout out to all the women and girls who try to find all the rights out there and try to adapt to the international mechanisms, to adapt that to the local situation, because sometimes, and most of the time, it's those are imposed to us, and we have to adapt. But as long as there is someone who fights and we're active to fight for the rights of the people, especially the women, then there is a right.
Yeah.
Thank
Alright.
you.
Thank you so much. And Miss Yesenia, maybe final statement.
For final message, which is the final message?
On my part, sorry.
No, Cecilia, please.
Yeah, please.
On my part, I think we really need to dig in on the gender disaggregated data and the inclusion of the gender action plan as part of the key instruments through which DSI conversation will be had and implementation done, because then we will be able to monitor and we will be able to tell how much of the benefits are flowing to women, and how the society generally is benefiting. I have seen a conversation on monetary and non-monetary here in the non-paper, and I'm wondering why, for example, non-monetary benefits have been said that they will be considered as being of value in the DSI conversation. So I'm still trying to digest that because non-monetary is non-monetary.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Miss Cecilia, Yesenia, you can also.
Thank you very much. My last word is just don't forget capacity building, and some activities must to be in a culturally adequate way, especially in the local context, indigenous context. And the biodiversity crisis needs partnerships.
Yeah.
And I hope all of us need to understand this. Partnerships between government, civil society, genders, and different groups. And the final call is make us to the women visible, and all the society and nature will win the battle. Thank you.
Thank you, Miss Yesenia. So the last, Miss Lim.
Sorry, just a very quick reflection. I think we've, in this whole, in the last few years, in my organization, some of the best inspirations that we get are from women and feminists. We're part of the Feminist Vaccine Alliance, which obviously work very hard to ensure, equitable access to the COVID-19 vaccines during the pandemic. And this group of women are fantastic. So I think a lot of inspiration from the Women Caucus in the CBD. You have been fantastic, and you've grown, and I've been in these discussions a long time, and it's fantastic. And I really think that the inspiration and the solidarity that we get here, and we can actually move things and change things, because we have a gender specific target. We have the gender plan of action, which we didn't have 10 years ago. So, this is something to be proud of.
Yeah,
And we can bring this into the DSI discussions because it's needed as well. Thank you.
Yes.
thank you.
Yeah, so let's applause to all of us here.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you
Also
so
for
much.
the UN Women Caucus. It's a very long struggle of women, and we believe that it's not end here. There's still a long way to also struggle together, but also it's needs inclusion. So when we talk about gender, it's not only talk about women, but here male also having that contribution in the conversation.
Yeah,
And we believe that we can go forward for all of us. So thank you so much for having me and also this session. It's really glad, and once again maybe we can
And thank you to you.
yeah.
thank you, same day. Thank you, same day.
Okay, contact group.
You can ask Russia.